Well, good evening. Is the audio okay? Can you hear everything back there? So, well, first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to just chat with you. And the reason that I brought the mic down here is that I really wanted this to be more of a conversation, you know, than a presentation. I make a lot of presentations, and quite candidly, I get bored with them. I am going to bore you towards the end with a little bit of a presentation. I'll talk a little bit about the port, because I think there's two or three things that, there's a lot of stuff happening at the port, as you can imagine, but I'd like to leave you with a couple of take-home messages, if you will, because after all, you are part of King County, and there are some things that are really important that's happening at the port that I would like to ask that you, I want to deputize you, so that when you leave, you know, you talk to your friends and relatives about some of the goings on, and some of the things that I want to try to, along with my commissioners, communicate as much as possible to anybody that will listen, because we're at risk, and there's some serious things that are happening. But I'll get to that a little bit later. First of all, I want to congratulate Tomio. I didn't realize that Wajimaya had been around long enough to be experiencing moving cargo with those little hooks rather than containers. So that obviously speaks to the longevity of a very top-class organization, Wajimaya's, which Becky and I are very devoted and loyal customers of. I can assure you of that. By the way, that new store in Nagomi is great. It's a lot closer to us, and we use it all the time. You know, when I was asked to talk a little bit about this evening, I again thought, well, I'll talk a little bit about the port, but I think that based on the gathering here and based on the other people that have spoken and that have presented before you, I thought that I would talk a little bit about my own family and how it contrasts perhaps to some of the experiences that you all, or many of you, have had. I know that Scott Oki was here the last time, I guess. Very good friend of mine. I think the world of him. I think he is doing an incredible job of being both an entrepreneur as well as a philanthropist. And that combination is just kind of an amazing combination. And he's just such a nice guy, you know, and how can you not be interested in listening to what he has to say? I do also know that Phyllis Campbell is on the agenda at some point. I've gotten to know her very well, and what a leader in our community, and just an incredible representation, not only for women, but obviously for the Asian community, and particularly for the Japanese American community. So I will hopefully make a point to have the opportunity to listen to her. I've heard her present a number of times, and she is a very, very interesting speaker. So, you know, with that in context, I did a little research. You know, I looked up, you know, I have been to the Densho website and sort of looked around there, and I know what that's about. There's some really heartbreaking and some inspiring stories in that website. And as I said, I know Scott, and then somehow I stumbled across this information piece about pride and shame. Everybody hear about that one? Okay, so as I read through that further, I come across my good friend Tomio, who is a leading advocate and really the leader that pushed that forward. And for those of you that don't know, apparently it was an exhibit, and it was an exhibit that was put together that sort of demonstrated what life was like for the Japanese Americans that were interned during the Second World War. And that exhibit somehow made it onto Mohai, unexpectedly, right? They weren't expecting that that exhibit to be exactly the way it turned out, but it turned out to be very much of a turning point. And the turning point was that the Japanese American community who had gone through this experience of being relocated actually got a voice. I think it's probably the best way to describe it. And that voice was, hey, you know, we went through this experience, but not a lot of people know about it. And so we're going to use this exhibit and this opportunity to tell the world what happened, and the result of it was actually that redress activity that took place. Remember when Japanese Americans that went through that experience were given $20,000 a piece. Now that obviously was in no way was an appropriate or an equivalent redress, but it got the point across. And the point was that it was an admission by the government that this was wrong and that it was an attempt to fix it. I happened to go through a YouTube of Senator Inoue. It was just about half an hour ago, by the way. I think it was the reason I was late was I got so involved in looking at that thing. I was a little bit late, but if you have an opportunity, you should go through the website or the YouTubes, and there is a script of Senator Inoue talking about why or how the Japanese community, Japanese American community, and really the broader Asian American community needs to be much more involved in leadership roles, particularly in politics. Now, of course, it's easy for him to say, but one of the things that he was talking about was the redress and the phrase that he used, which I thought was so descriptive and so inspiring when he was talking about this whole event was, he said, this is only half an hour ago, right? So I think I got it right, but he said, what other country in this world would step up and admit their guilt and try to do something about it? Yes. That was his takeaway, about that whole event, and there was a lot of people that went through a lot of hurt, but the bottom line is, that at the end there was this very, very inspiring message. What was that? I forget exactly when it happened. It happened way too late, but nevertheless, it did happen. 88. So anyways, I was reading through all of that and trying to get caught up on things and reading about the experiences that Japanese Americans went through during the internment camp. By the way, there's another story that Becky and I are personally aware of. Norman Netta has become a good friend of ours. And every time we go back to Maryland, we try to hook up with him for dinner or lunch or whatever. One of his favorite stories is that when he was in an internment camp, he became very good friends with this gentleman. His name slips my memory. Do you remember?
Yes.
Huh?
Simpson.
That's right. That's right. Alan Simpson. Baby. Well, you've heard the story, obviously, yeah. Alan Simpson and Norman Netta became very, very good friends, and it was during that experience when they were kids going through this internment experience. And so there's some really, really neat stories that came out of that. Many of you in this room are were directly involved as kids or had your parents that were in one of these 9 or 10 internment camps. I forget exactly what the number is. So what I wanted to share with you is a kind of a different perspective, because I think that a lot of people assume Japanese American must have been in the internment camp or their parents were, etc. But there's a very small minority of Japanese Americans who were somewhere else in the world during that time. And one of them, or two of them, were my parents, mother and father. They were American citizens living in Japan when the war broke out, and their neighbors knew that they were American citizens. So that was kind of an interesting period. And I'll just tell you a little bit about it. My dad was born in Hawaii. His father was a migrant farmer, migrant worker, working in the sugar plantation in Hawaii. And my mother was, her family owned a little restaurant on San Pedro Street in Los Angeles. Some of you that are familiar with that area. And so they got married, and this was in the mid-30s or so when they got married, and he was graduating from USC, University of Southern California. There's another story related to that, which I'll come back to a little bit later. It's kind of interesting if we have time. But they got married, and the combination of him being Japanese American and and having it was in the midst of the Depression, he was not able to get a job. So he had this college degree, and he had some experience as an engineer, but he couldn't get a job. And so my mom and dad decided, okay, well, let's try Japan. My mother spoke Japanese, but she actually had quite a bit of trouble with English. My dad was one of the very few people that I know that were absolutely bilingual. He spoke both English and Japanese without an accent. So for him, it was no problem. So they moved back to Japan, and this was in the late 30s, and obviously the war broke out, and they had kids. I have 3 older brothers. I'm the youngest. I'm the only one that was born after the war. But so their experience, living in Japan when Japan was at war with the United States, and 3 kids living right outside of the outskirts of Tokyo, it had to have been just an incredibly, I'll say, interesting and challenging experience. So, a couple of the incidents that they relate to me, which sort of puts a picture of what that experience had to have been. As I said, I wasn't around, but obviously, they told me that what little news there was from the front lines in the Pacific, that throughout the entire war they were always told that the Japanese were winning. Everything was going their way, and it was all positive news. And so obviously when things turned the other way, everyone was surprised, including my parents. My parents told me that, as you would expect, there was nothing to eat. There were, personal supplies. There was just nothing. And what little there was, if you were fortunate to have some money, you could maybe get through the black market. But other than that, it was a pretty severe existence. My dad did have a job when he went back there, and he was working for Mitsubishi Heavy Industry. And he was helping to design some of their tanks. And so the citizens, or the neighborhood, knew that he was an American. I mean, he was Japanese. He looked just like us, but he was an American citizen, and they knew that my mom was as well. And so one day, they were one of the very few in the neighborhood that had enough money to go out and buy a radio. Well, some of you may remember that back then, a radio was not a little transistor. It was actually an appliance. I mean, it was a huge thing. It was a huge thing. You couldn't buy one and bring it into your house without having everybody notice that you were buying a radio. So it probably took 2 or 3 people to bring it in. So everybody knew that my parents had gotten this thing that looked like it was a radio. And so the next day, the local police came in and hauled my father away and arrested him. And they thought that he was communicating with the enemy, and using that radio as a short way to communicate with the Americans, to tell them where the ammunition depot was and stuff like that. So it was, it was obviously quite an interesting experience for them, but they got